Today, we're going to talk about perception and communication. Is our perception really reality, especially in our relationships? That's what we're going after today, so let's get into those details. Alex Lyon here. Everything on this channel is here for your professional development, and so we've got to talk about perception. I'm sure it can feel like to us that our perception of communication is the reality, the one accurate way to see the world. The problem is people often have different perceptions of the exact same situation, and we really don't start our conversations by naturally understanding each other. In fact, there's one theory called the coordinated management of meaning that says that miscommunication in conversations is really the norm. Miscommunication, misunderstanding, that's generally the starting place for most of our interactions, and we use communication as a process to overcome that gap, to create shared meaning, shared perception with other people. Really, that's what we're looking for. And if you think about it, if you already 100% understood the other person, then you really wouldn't need to talk about it much. That would be more like mind reading, and that's not possible as far as we know. So we need communication to bridge the gap. So let's look at 4 overlapping influences that shape the way we perceive communication. These will help us ultimately understand each other more effectively and help us to become better communicators. So let's talk about these 4. Number 1, the message itself. There has to be some communication in the first place to perceive, some conversation. We call this a speech act in certain circles. And when we're communicating, words are an important part of the message. Words have shades of meaning. So you might use, for example, warm relational words versus cold task-driven words. You might use specific words versus general words. And if you're speaking generally, for example, and say, I have a dog, then you're leaving lots of wiggle room for interpretation about what type of dog the other person is picturing in their head. But if you get more specific with your words and you say, my 3-year-old golden retriever, then you have just nudged the other person's likely perception in a very specific direction because you use specific language. Another part of our message is our tone, how we say things, our attitude, how we express ourselves nonverbally. And I tell you, many people have no idea about how they come across in this way. I know a person, for example, and maybe you know people like this, who has a very rude, abrasive tone. And when somebody recently called him on it, he said, well, I didn't say anything rude. I just said, sure, no problem. Even in talking about it, he had no idea how he was coming across. Now, technically, the words, sure, no problem, aren't rude. But, buddy, your nonverbals were horrible. So how we act out our message definitely shapes other people's perceptions of us very profoundly. And if your nonverbals are always saying, I'm a jerk, then don't be surprised if some people perceive you that way. So words and nonverbal cues shape other people's perceptions. So question for you to consider, how do you think people perceive you? Have you ever gotten feedback, for example, about how you come across? I'll be interested to hear your comments in the section below the video. But now let's put ourselves in the position of the listener. There are a few more layers that come into play that shape the way we are perceiving other people when they communicate to us. So number 2, we all have what you might call psychological filters. Nobody absorbs communication in its purest form. We arrive at conversations with an already existing set of mental and emotional filters. So before that other person ever even spoke to us, we had attitudes, beliefs, opinions. So 2 people can hear the exact same message, and you might see the positive side, and the other person might see the negative side of it. Your life experience, or what we call anchors, shape the way you see a topic. You have positions or viewpoints already on topics. So there's a a theory called social judgment theory that says we tend to have one of three reactions to messages that we hear, depending upon those anchors. We either accept a message when we hear it, we reject a message, or we might be non-committal about how we feel about what somebody's saying. Now, we don't always tell them that this is our reaction, but that's the way we filter it. And if we already have thought a lot about a specific topic, let's say a topic that's close to our hearts, then we are really likely to have a narrow range of acceptance, but a very wide range of rejection. So our minds are not blank slates when we listen. We're not hearing things in a pure form. And that whole perception process shapes the way we understand the communication that we're hearing. And like I used to be in rock bands when I was young. And boy, if you started a conversation about music or bands with me back then, that topic could really set me off. I had a lot of these psychological filters about it. We all arrive at conversations like this. We have a life's worth of experiences that shape how we perceive what the person is saying that have nothing to do with the actual person who is talking to us. We were like that probably before we even met this other person. So question, do you have any hot buttons that really set you off? I know I do. So if you do, keep in mind that those psychological filters are not the same as the other person's psychological filters. You're perceiving things differently. So number 3, relationships. In any relationship, you have a shared history with that person, roles that you understand. You have dynamics that you take into account when you're interpreting communication with that person. So I have 2 brothers. I'm in the middle. There's one older and one younger, and I love them both dearly, and I hope they're watching. But we have a lot of history together, and so anything they say to me, I would hear it through that relationship history that I have with each of them. And let's say we had some wicked argument about sports at one point years ago. I would probably hear any new conversations about sports with my brothers with that argument way in the back of my mind. That relationship history would shape our communication in the moment. So here's the fascinating part to me. You have a different individual relationship history with each person that you know, each person that is in your life. And new people are no exception. So we have lots of uncertainty, for example, when we're talking to someone we've just met, someone we don't know that real well. And that uncertainty certainly makes us perceive communication with that person differently than we would perceive the same exact conversation with someone we know and trust already. So a question for you to put this to the test. Do you have that person in your life who you could tell just about anything to and get away with it? And they could say just about anything to you and get away with it? Maybe your mother or father. For me, it's my wife. Well, that shows that those specific relationships shape our perception of communication. Number 4, culture is a powerful filter. We all grow up learning norms, values, and the language of our group. And we use different expressions depending upon where we grew up. And those language norms shapes our perceptions. So I grew up in Rhode Island, and instead of saying drinking fountain, we famously say bubbler. But we say it with that Rhode Island accent. We say bubbler. And it's the same thing. But some places they say soda. Do you say soda or do you say pop when you're talking about drinking a drink? So I used to live in Arkansas, and they literally call all soda Coke. So here's a normal conversation with a server. I'll take a Coke. And then the server says, what kind? And you say Sprite. And if you're from a certain part of the South, then you know exactly what that conversation means. That's normal. But at a deeper level, there are unspoken cultural rules that signal to us what certain kinds of communication mean. And we learn to tell, for example, in my experience, what clowning is, clowning around, versus an actual insult. So again, in Rhode Island's a lot like Boston or New York City in its attitude. And in these places, especially in the working class and middle class, we will sometimes give each other a hard time. And that's usually a sign that we actually like each other, that we're friends. So the expression is you're busting each other up. That's the way we say it. And that's like a bonding experience in a way. And it can get pretty rough, but growing up, I would only do that type of interaction with actual friends. Now, that may sound weird because it can get a little mean, but for people who didn't grow up that way, it's a little strange. And it's actually not like I would never do this with somebody that I didn't know and didn't like very well, because that could actually lead to a conflict. It's difficult to explain, and there are shades of meaning even in there. But when you live in a culture and grow up in a culture, you learn where that line is and you learn what those behaviors mean. And really, every culture has its own set of rules that we use to perceive things, unspoken rules. So here's a question for you. Can you think of a way that the culture you grew up in shapes the way you see the world? I think you probably can if you give it a moment. And I would love, again, to hear your comments to how your culture has shaped your perceptions. So as I said at the beginning, is perception reality in relationships? And I know based on what I've said, it sounds like I'm saying no, perception's not reality because we have these filters. But that's partially true, but I want to say it this way. Our perception may not be the one reality, but it is our reality, and it is the other person's reality, at least for the moment. So in the short run, we can literally only start with our perception, but that does not make our perception perfectly accurate, and we should not use our perception as an excuse for poor communication in return. In fact, our perceptions may not even be fair in any given situation. We may have a very warped perception, for example. The key is to remember that communication is that process that we all must use to reach shared understanding with other people. So be patient, and communication is not a one-time event with some kind of fixed meeting. If you don't understand each other, consider that to be normal at first. Misunderstanding is not some clear sign that something has gone very wrong. Miscommunication is usually a sign that more communication still needs to take place. So I'd love to hear your comments in that section below the video. I do read those comments and I respond. So God bless, thanks, and I will see you in the next video.